the Campaign Finance and Public Disclosure Board unearthed a treasure trove of documents in their investigation. And so I think there are a few ways that the investigation could continue on. One of those in particular is it looks like the GOP did a similar scenario in the creation of their redistricting group. And so essentially what the Campaign Finance Board said on Friday is that they circumvented state law, trying to avoid disclosure laws in creating this recount fund. And some of the evidence I've uncovered, it looks like they did a similar sort of scenario in the creation of their redistricting fund. And so we're currently looking at whether we need to file a complaint around this particular issue, making similar allegations to what we made around the Count Them All Properly recount fund.
Do you know if anybody donated or sent their money through that corporation?
We do. There was actually a New York Times article about 2 weeks ago that specifically highlighted a corporation that had given money to that fund. And so if that is the case, and we are able to determine that the Republican Party did in fact create that fund, it was essentially arm of the Republican Party, that actually would be an illegal contribution because political parties are not allowed to accept corporate contributions. And so that would be a violation of 211B.15, which bans that, which actually carries a very severe penalty.
Now, it seems like the lawyers have been asking the state to pay them for this. Does that indicate that maybe there wasn't a lot of money that was sent to this corporation?
For the recount, yes. And so what the documents unearthed on Friday is that Count Them All Properly only received one contribution of around $30,000 from Bob Cummings, and they then distributed that money to the lawyers who essentially helped pay off for some of the recount funds. So that's the only money they've received. And so that's why in the end you saw essentially that money move from Count Them All Properly as an expense to then being put on the Republican Party. So now the Republican Party increased its overall debt load by more than $500,000.
But the redistricting, you think that there's more than one contribution?
Oh, yes. And so with that particular piece, yes, but we just don't know how much they spent. It's likely that they did rack up significant legal costs associated with that challenge. Actually, they submitted their so their funding, I think, what was it, around $180,000. So we know, they spent over $180,000, and so the nonprofit could be responsible for anything that the state doesn't pay. Because that's the other thing that's going on right now with the redistricting, is that the parties actually asked the state to pay for the legal expenses. Secretary of State Ritchie, along with Common Cause, wrote a letter to Secretary of State Ritchie urging him to oppose that because we believe that the state shouldn't have to fund the legal expenses for the political parties around that. So the court's still deciding that issue. And so whatever is left over, yes, will be some sort of debt associated with that. And right now it's the nonprofit that's going to be responsible for that debt unless they've been able to fundraise to basically pay for all those expenses. But we don't know because they're technically registered right now as a 501c4.
If the Campaign Finance Board, and you were to file a complaint, or somebody was, and they come back and say this is wrong, is there any remedy other than a $100 fine for not filing as a political organization?
On this particular one, you would have a similar argument of circumvention. So there would be a $3,000 fine probably put against actually Tony Sutton again, and with that there is a gross misdemeanor charge associated with that. So that's the likely thing. But this is the problem right now, and I think the case on Friday from the Campaign Finance Board highlighted this, is that our laws right now around disclosure and campaign finance are really weak, that there are extremely weak penalties that are associated with this. All the stuff that the board found, essentially, they only were able to attribute $30,000 in fines with this. I think the fine should have been significantly more, but unfortunately Minnesota state law doesn't allow for that. And I think we really need to strengthen it and make sure that there's stronger enforcement, but also make sure that there's more severe penalties to ensure that that is really deterring people from committing these type of crimes.
You mentioned criminal sanctions here. That's nothing that you can pursue. That has to be the county attorney that decides to do that, correct?
In the final episode, yes. But in order to proceed with that on the 211B side, the state law actually requires that a complaint be filed with the Office of Administrative Hearing. And so tomorrow morning, we're going to announce that we've actually filed such a complaint. And that begins the process. And so essentially OAH, Office of Administrative Hearing, will begin a probable cause determination. And so they will accept evidence from us and then the defendant in the case and then make that determination. If they do find probable cause, then they'll forward those findings on to the county attorney, who then will prosecute this.
What's the possible penalty in a criminal case like that? And we're talking really just one person at this point,
There'll be multiple people. It'll be both the corporation itself and Tony Sutton associated with that. With this particular crime, this is actually a felony, which is why it goes to the county attorney. And so that actually allows for a 5-year jail sentence and a $20,000 fine. So this is a pretty significant penalty. And those are the type of penalties we want to see elsewhere, strong penalties that really are a deterrent to this type of, rule breaking.
But we really don't know who's in charge of that corporation. It seems like every week there was somebody else who was the CEO, and none of them wanted to admit that they were it. So how do you decide who you're going to prosecute?
Well, I think the board, the Campaign Finance and Public Disclosure Board, really uncovered who the head of it was, and so I think we'll rely upon that evidence. It was both Mary Igu, a Republican activist, and then Dan Pooh, who is the person that actually created the corporation itself.